Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Nisha Manahil and I'm your host for today's session. I would like to give you all a very warm welcome to TBH High School Debates episode 2. TBH debate was an initiative taken by the Black Hole to provide a platform for creativity and expression to our youth and to educate them regarding current affairs not only on a global level but also nationally. We often overlook important issues due to the constant hammering of political and, in general, terrible news. So, in order to provide an opportunity to enlightened minds, TBH debate was formed. Under the guidance of our esteemed judges, we will be discussing issues relating to climate change and human modification. Let's take a moment to recognize our judges. Firstly, we have Dr. Nayyar, a renowned physicist and author who has played an important role in talking about issues such as those related to education, nuclear safety, and energy. He has served in the faculties of Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad from 1973 till 2005 and also at LUMS. Next, we have Ma'am Sadia Manzoor, who is a professor of physics at ComStats University with a doctorate from Quaid-e-Azam University and experienced as a visiting scientist at the University of York and University of Delaware. Dr. Sadia's insights will enrich our debate. And finally, we have Syed Ammar Mehdi, who is a computer science and liberal arts graduate from Habib University. Today, we'll discuss the complex world of genetic engineering and human enhancement, exploring the ethical implications of emerging technologies. In our second session, we will shift our focus to the pressing issue of climate refugees, examining global responsibility and the ways to address growing concerns. The format of debate will be as follows. There will be 2 minutes given to each participant for an opening statement, after which the participants will begin the discussion phase, where they will be given either 2 to 3 minutes to present their argument for an hour-long discourse session. After this, a 10-minute break will be assigned to write their concluding statements, for which 1 minute will be given to each participant. I would like to invite all the participants to stage. Please come on stage when your name comes. Ayan Beg from LGS. Ahmed Abdul Moiz from LGS. Iman Said from Beacon House Karakaram campus. Hetam Tahir from BPC. Haroon Safir from LGS. Hisan Haider Malik from Frobels Peshawar Road campus. Shahram Jalil from Frobels Wah campus. Shayan Ilyas from BMI. Ryan Ghazanfar from Benchmark. Shahir Ahmed from Frobels Road, Peshawar. And then Talha from Modern Age. And Talha from Modern Age Public School. I would like you all to give a big round of applause to our participants. Your time will be announced shortly. You may start when the timer starts.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. So our topic today is genetic modification in humans, and is it ethical or not? What exactly is genetic modification? It is a collaboration between humans and the bacteria which are present in the world in a quantity of millions and billions of things. And we as humans, we discovered that the genes of a bacteria has a thing known as a CRISPR, right? What is a CRISPR? A CRISPR is a part of a bacterial genes which allows us to take out that genes and use it to copy or paste certain genes in other people or other humans as well as animals. Now, what this allows us to do is that if there are certain things that are not really wanted in a human's body, those genes could be taken out and then replaced with the desirable genes. Now, people raise questions on this. Is it ethical or is it not? Well, we have two questions from all of us. Is a person's right to life absolute? Yes, it is absolute. Secondly, does a person have a legal right to take out his genes and replace it with a genes that is desirable under legal consent? Yes, it is. Now, what we propose is that every CRISPR technology, the usage of CRISPR technology, shall be used within a proper consensus of proper a panel of doctors, which will allow everyone to use this technology through a proper mechanism and through a proper consent. Now, what people believe is that if we use CRISPR, it will raise ethical concerns, right? But ethical concerns shall not be raised as a person's right to life. For example, if I have a disease and the only cure available, the only cure available is through CRISPR, I would want that to save my life, right? We'll be looking forward on these arguments later on.
Against the motion. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Oh, my name is Ahmed Abdul Moiz. I'm from Lahore Grammar School, and I am against this particular topic. My primary concern lies within germline genetic modification. Understand how genetic modification works. People utilize genetic modification in 3 factors in life. Number 1, to enhance their athletic ability. Number 2, to enhance their intelligence. And number 3, to enhance their attractiveness. Why does that matter? It matters because the primary gene that we try to modify is known as the TLDR gene. And through that, we try to usually modify certain cells, particularly the neural crest cells. Understand that germline genetic modification is harmful. It's harmful. Why? Because if you modify the same genes in various humans in a mass system, what are you doing? You're essentially losing the diversity within our gene pool. What makes us different across geographical circumstances, whether it be people from North America or whether it be people from Asia, we are different because we have diversification within our gene pool. When you utilize genetic modification, you're utilizing it to enhance your intelligence, athleticism, or attractiveness. You're essentially lowering the diversity in the gene pool, which makes you more prone to future diseases, which makes you more prone to future certain pandemics that may occur, and it may result in an easier wipeout of our entire civilization. Consider IVF, for example. IVF right now costs around $12,000 to $5,000. If you freeze your embryos, it costs around $4,000. And if you genetically test those embryos before you genetically modify that particular person or utilize those genes, it may cost you around $300. That might just create each class divisions within a society that are already rampant, and it might result in a social inequality, which is why I further oppose this motion. Understand what that means. If we need to create equality between those class divisions to allow genetic modification to be available for all, what that means is that the government will need to create tax divisions, and it may need to subsidize genetic modification for every individual out there. Why is that bad? Consider IVF, for example. IVF for the individual person may cost around $20,000. If genetic modification needs to be subsidized, why not use something like Neuralink? Neuralink to eradicate the social divisions instead of spending $20,000 on something as simple as genetic modification. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hassan Tahir. I'm from Beacon House, Potahar campus, and I am for the argument of genetic engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, you all must realize that we are on the brink of a new age, one that offers us the opportunity to redefine the very essence of what it means to be a human. The question we are faced is with not merely one of ethics, but of our collective future. Is it ethical to modify the human body to enhance human potential genetically? I argue that it is not only ethical, but a moral obligation to pursue this path. The potential to alleviate suffering, expand human capabilities, and improve the quality of life for everyone is within our grasp. And to turn away from it would be to deny humanity the chance of reaching its potential. You all must realize that the core principle of ethical decision-making is in acting for the benefit of others. Genetic engineering embodies this principle by offering us the means to eliminate hereditary diseases, reduce human sufferings, and elevate our capabilities beyond natural limitations. Imagine a world where there's no Down syndrome, no Huntington disease, problems which usually are unavoidable can now be eradicated completely. Is this not ethical? Enhancing human potential through genetic modification aligns with the very essence of human nature: to improve, to innovate, to transcend. For centuries, we have sought to overcome our biological limitations through education, medicine, technology. Genetic enhancement is simply the next step in this evolutionary journey. With great power comes great responsibility. The potential of genetic engineering is immense, but also so is the need for careful regulation. If genetic engineering is publicized rather than privatized, there will be no more need for social divisions, as it will be available for everyone through the use of careful planning. With robust ethical frameworks in place, we can minimize risks while maximizing the benefits, ensuring that genetic enhancement serves the greater good. Thank you.
No, from you guys, not from them. Sorry. Firstly, क्योंकि उन्होंने like CRISPR technology वगैरह introduce कर दिया, do I need to reintroduce it in my speeches or can I ignore that type? That's completely on. Further, अभी मैं rebuttals दे सकता हूँ या नहीं? After the opening statement. Okay, sure.
I am Imantas name Sayed, and starting in 3, 2, 1. Before we discuss the ethics of genetic engineering, I would like to lay a basic definition of genetic engineering. It is when genes are modified through technology. Simply, we can add or subtract from our genes. We may not realize it, but it has been a part of our lives for almost half a century. To be exact, it was introduced in 1973, and it was officially used in 1982 to produce human insulin to treat diabetes. Since then, it has been used for various purposes, such as the development of vaccine, production of cancer therapies, brewing yeasts, genetically modified plants and livestock, and much more. More recently, it is also being used to detect genetic diseases in embryos, such as cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, muscular dystrophy, and thalassemia through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. But now, we may even be able to select physical traits like hair and eye color. At this rate, we may develop testing to see if they're going to be intelligent or athletic enough or not. Casually create another divide in the society, create another hierarchy, widen the inequality gap in our society, without even knowing whether the genetic mutation will result in a heap of new diseases or not. Once again, we will be producing blonde hair, white skin, blue-eyed babies, and hail another Hitler. But let's look at something more recent. Back in 2019, China reported that they created transgenic monkeys with extra human genes to understand human evolution. This may seem like a random piece of information, but if we were to genetically modify humans, a lot more of such experiments will be taking place. So, is it really ethical to put animals through such experimentations? Can we really justify these experiments for the betterment of our future? And if so, what is this improved future that we are aiming for? What is this untapped potential that we deem absolutely necessary to achieve? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Hisan Haidaru. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable Chair, we need to understand why genetic modification in the first place exists. Genetic modification exists to eliminate genetic faults, eliminate genetic mutations, eliminate genetic diseases. And furthermore, we need to understand what genetic engineering itself is, right? Genetic engineering is the modification of the human genome, the modification of the human DNA. The potential of such thing is absolutely limitless. While it might be tried in this debate to limit it to only genetic diseases, what we can do by modifying our genome, by modifying our genetics, is strengthen our immune system, strengthen various aspects of the human, strengthen so many aspects which could prevent so many problems, prevent so many diseases. There's a common question that's going to be raised throughout this debate. Is it ethical? Is it ethical to modify the human genome? A baby can't consent to his genome being changed, right? I'm 90% sure that baby would consent to not being disadvantaged in life. That baby would consent to him not having to suffer from mental illnesses, not having to suffer from physical illnesses, not having to suffer from genetic illnesses. For example, in 2018, China, using CRISPR technology, made children which are immune to HIV. I just don't see why we can't do that with other diseases. And if we progress in this direction, what will occur is that we make humans immune to other diseases. What this will do is in the future prevent multiple deaths. It will prevent. And the thing is, we need to understand at this point the cost of human life, because the cost of human life is infinite, correct? And since it's infinite, what we need to understand is that genetic modifications needs to occur so we can protect human life, so we can protect humanity as a whole. Further, we need to understand that 70 to 80 million people worldwide are affected by genetic diseases. These people are the people most in danger. These people are the people we can help with this technology. And that is why, Honorable Chair, I believe genetic modification is absolutely necessary.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Haroon Safir and I'm from LGS. Let's first come to the topic at hand. The main term that everyone here in this committee missed was human potential. We need to understand what human potential exactly is. There's a proper difference between a need and a want. A genetic change is a need. It is a need essential to everyone. However, a non-genetic makeup, such as cosmetics, such as implants, are not a need. It's just a basic want. Are you going to imply the technology and all of the assets that you need in a need to be applicable on a want? That doesn't make sense. One comes here and talks about the right to life. Other use rhetorics to explain the right to life as a whole. Understand the fact what ethics here exactly are. When they say that a baby would give informed consent, understand the timeline. Let's come up with a timeline of the production of insulin, which was obviously the first genetic modification, right? 1982. It's not only been more than 50 years when we are talking about genetic modification on embryos. Does that even make sense? Do we even know the ethical boundaries that we're eliminating as a whole? Even in sociological research, we need to understand that informed consent does matter. A child's embryo that is going to face perfect health risks after 60 to 70 years does have the right to eliminate it. However, we are eliminating the form of informed consent here. Another problem, delegates, let's understand the fact that human potential is the cause of what? Competition, right? Let's embrace sports as an example. What can happen in sports? A genetically modified athlete, a genetically modified runner, and athlete will be a part of individual people. What is this going to do? Disrupt fairness as a whole. Understand the fact that their claims are not even on the basis of ethical guidelines, delegates. Understand the fact that even competitiveness in sports in your major quizzes is going to eliminate from it. Rather, let's just provide a guideline for it. Understand the fact that for the past 50 years, we have been introducing genetic modification as a whole, where it is completely disregarding the ethical guidelines. Just for the sake of attention, you cannot put forward your stance that genetic guidelines are available and they're ethically right. Consider it, they are essentially not. Thank you.
Good morning and Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Sharam Jaleel, and today I will present my view on this topic of genetic engineering and human enhancement. Today we find ourselves on the verge of an incredible scientific revolution, one that could fundamentally alter humanity itself, genetic engineering. As we begin to unlock the secrets of our DNA, we are faced with an extraordinary opportunity to improve human health and capabilities. Imagine a future where diseases such as Alzheimer's and Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis are removed, where enhancements can boost our intelligence, immunity, resilience to extreme conditions, especially in places such as which would be helpful for applications such as space exploration, helping further development and making mankind resilient to climate change. In a world where tens of millions of people are likely to die to climate change in the next 2 decades, maybe even more. It would also help to create a world where no physical and mental disability would hinder any individual from participating as a part of mainstream society. It will lead to healthier, more capable individuals, creating a better world for everyone. Now I admit There are several negative points. There are risks. There is the risk of introducing mutations. There is the risk of introducing genetic disorders or impacting the system of human evolution. But if we do these experiments after careful research, have proper regulations, then there is no need that we can call that there will be significant health risks or disadvantages. For example, if we can include regulation so that access to these technologies is equitable, so that there would be no difference between the enhanced and non-enhanced, a difference between the wealthy and developing nations, since all would be able to access these technologies equally. Similarly, if there are regulations and frameworks to ensure that these technologies are safe and used for the common good, they can be monitored after they have been given, like in cases of strength and intelligence, which would mean that no athletes could be, or any other of these people would be able to misuse these advancements. Instead, permission to complete paragraph or sentence. Would not be able to misuse these technologies. Lastly, if these technologies are used only when and where necessary, for example, in crucial health diseases, and not for people's gratification of wants, such as beauty and personality, then this would not consider misuse or create any level of social inequality. Can we at least have permission, like, to complete one whole paragraph, 2 sentences? One sentence. You're only allowed to complete the sentence already. Oh, but it was a whole paragraph.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Respect, Shayan Ilyas, and I'm from BMI, Beacon House Margla campus. Respected delegates and fellow chairs, we need to understand the history of genetic engineering to understand how things reach the point that they currently are on. While the concept of genetic engineering has been circulating the world since 1973, it wasn't until 1994 when genetically modified crops for agriculture and enhancement were commercially introduced. From that point onward, scientists realized the potential that genetic engineering possesses and started working on harnessing it. In 1996, the fundamentals of genetic engineering were used for a feat that was never imagined before in human history. Using the science behind genetic engineering, the Dolly the sheep was cloned. This achievement by Scottish scientists was a double jeopardy, however, on one side sparking severe controversies regarding its ethicality, and on the other side prompting further research and advancements into this matter. As time passed, further advancements were made and quarrels against it grew alike. In 2012, CRISPR-Cas9 was introduced as a technology that revolutionized genetic engineering, allowing humans to modify specific genes for their character trait changes. Later the decade, numerous gene therapies were introduced for wellness purposes. These genetic engineering works, though aimed at modifying and altering genes for health purposes, raised controversies across the world for ethics. Fellow delegates and chairs, you need to understand that humans are always hungry for better and more. Having realized this fact, I'm sure you all would understand that it wouldn't be long before humans start modifying their offsprings for blue eyes, sharp jawlines, and unnaturally high intelligence level. While currently these kind of designer babies are available to the very rich in the social hierarchy, I find it hard to believe that in the coming century it would be available to the wider public. If that happens, the already worse social inequality and divide between the rich and the poor will further worsen, coming to the point that the rich will be absolute superhumans while the poor will be mere insects in comparison to them. Thank you.
My name's Talha Munsif. I'll start in 3, 2, and 1. Our respected judges, imagine a world where your child's genetic destiny is no longer a game of chance, where diseases are mere relics of the past, and human potential is unleashed unlike ever before. But how? That's the question, how? Genetic modification, I believe, is no longer a concept of science fiction anymore. Rather, it beckons us to confront the ultimate question that what does it mean to be human? And before we ponder upon that point, consider this, that one out of three children in America, they're born with a genetic disorder, which could have been prevented. And every man that dies with a genetic disorder could have been cured had we inoculated ourselves into genetic therapy or gene therapy. Genetic engineering, I believe, can enable us to withstand the outlaws of the society in terms of, well, various genetic diseases, such as Alzheimer's, as a fellow participant has enunciated. And to conclude my brief opening statement, I'd like to quote a quote. The quote is that, and it's by a geneticist, Francis Collins, who said, and I quote, "To the extent that we can use our knowledge of the genome to prevent suffering and to improve the human condition, it is ethical to do so," and I unquote. I'm done.
Respected judges and fellow attendees, my name is Jan Ghazanfar, and I stand with the notion that genetic modification will create social inequality. Say that you are the hiring manager for a construction project that will last, let's say, around a month, and the person that comes up to you says that, "Hey, I broke my arm, but I will be good to go by the time the project starts." With such a glaring disposition, you would not be inclined at first to hire this person. However, I want you all to realize that if I am a man who is born with a working pair of arms, a working pair of legs, a working pair of eyes, and a functioning mind, I will be the man who has the broken arm in a world of genetic mutation or modification. Then this is just the beginning. I'm talking brain boosters in office scenarios. I'm talking compulsory muscle mass increase in army personnel. Let's stay on that example, actually. Let's say that the person in the army decides to retire early or is out of action over injury. If he cannot manage the required medication that he needs to supplement his new genes, his new muscle, he will not be able, and he is not covered by the military to exactly help with his treatment, he will not be able to maintain himself unless the government is not willing to subsidize the millions, possibly billions, affected by this new change and is not able to control drug regulation or DNA regulation to the point where it can prevent the creation of an upper echelon. I believe that DNA modification should not be open to the masses. Thank you.
Your opening statements are finished. Whoever wishes to speak first may raise their hand. Acha, participants, one more thing. Please note that all discussion and debate should be carried out in a cordial manner. You may not interrupt during the discussion. That is very important. We emphasize on an intellectual content. You may go first. You have about 2 minutes.
My name is Ayan Beg. Ladies and gentlemen, if we were to believe and agree with the statement that the opposition said, that makeup and genetic customization is wrong, well, I guess then most of the plastic surgeons, the tattoo artists, and the makeup artists, they will go unemployed. Ladies and gentlemen, what they don't realize is that if we are to genetically modify our genes not for life and only for looks, that does not carry on onto our future generations, as the CRISPR technology is only used on the genetics of your whole body except the reproductive cells, so that the genetic mutations do not occur in the future generations. But that's not even the point, ladies and gentlemen. The point is that if you have the opportunity to save your life through genetic modification, how can you say it's unethical? Ladies and gentlemen, what they don't realize is that if you were to have a disease that is only curable through a genetic modification, why wouldn't you sell all of of the things you own to save your life, ladies and gentlemen. A person's life is the most important thing to themselves and to their family, ladies and gentlemen. If you ask go to USA and ask the people who have genetically modified themselves and saved their lives, they'll never tell you that it is unethical. They'll never tell you how bad it was. They'll never tell you how they were affected by it in a wrong way. They'll always tell you that they'll thank the doctors who saved their lives through these genetic modifications, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what we must believe is that obviously a child cannot be genetically mutated without his consent, right? But over a certain legal age, they should be allowed to change themselves in order to protect themselves, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, when we come to genetic modifications, it also we must also realize it can also help contribute to our environment, ladies and gentlemen. There are certain microbiomes within our animals which release methane, ladies and gentlemen. If we genetically modify these microbiomes, they will allow us to not release enough methane in the world and contribute to our global climate change, and as well as help human lives, ladies and gentlemen. Before that, any other questions?
You have a question, or do you want to give a rebuttal?
I have a question. Also, plus a rebuttal, so make sure.
You may give it. You may ask the questions during your argument. Your time is over.
Okay, so first of all, I think we need to realize that when we are talking, Iman Sayed, that when we're talking about genetic modification, we're talking about embryos. That life doesn't exist yet. And I think consent is a far thing into future when that life doesn't even exist. And how are we talking about saving more lives when it doesn't even exist? And I mean, we already have 8 billion people. What more people do you want? And even if that is true, you are saving life and somehow you do get their consent as an embryo. How do you even know this technology is going to be successful? Because as far as I know, in 2019, the experiment conducted by the Chinese they injected 86 embryos with the CRISPR technology a panelist mentioned. And 71 embryos survived, 54 were genetically tested, and only 28 were successful. With that success rate, do you really think we are going to reach 100%? Why do you think that we will, in like 10, 15, 20 years, reach a level where it's going to be 100%? Well, the possibility is never 100%. Even if it is, how do you know it's not going to be carried forward? How do you know what genetic mutations are going to come and not?
Don't directly bash each other, also address the audience. I understand you giving rebuttals, but make sure to address the audience as well.
If you answer a rebuttal,
You may raise your hand. You may raise your hand.
My name is San Haider. Okay, can I start now? Hisan Haider. Starting in 3, 2, 1. A point was brought up by team opposition. They came up here and they claimed that that so many people, so many embryos died with that success rate. Can we be successful? Can we be confident in the future? But tell me, which experiment was initially successful? Tell me which experiment had initially a great success rate. The matter of the fact is, as scientific progression, as science progresses, the success rate will become greater. You know why there were 80 different embryos? Because there were different ways of CRISPR technology on all of them. We were seeing which is the most safe. We were saying which is the best way. We are saying which is the safest way for these people. And that's how science progresses. Furthermore, they talked about the consent of an embryo. I can assure you that whether we have their word or whether we don't have their word, any human being that is coming into this world wouldn't want to die soon, wouldn't want to be disadvantaged. When they talk about there being social inequality, what they fail to understand is that already there is a social inequality. What they fail to understand in many terms is when they talked about sports, for example, that some people will have will be genetically better, so will be better. Okay, first point at this, people are naturally genetically better, why are they allowed to compete on the same field then? What you're saying is that they're genetically modified, so they have better genes, so they can't participate on the same field. But by that logic, people in the world which are already genetically better, for example, the Tanzanians and the Kenyans are genetically better in running, they have more muscles. Why are they allowed to compete in the same field as others? Furthermore, sporting competitions could have limitations, could prevent these stuff. They could have restrictions preventing genetic modification in the sport aspects of their players. Further, we need to understand that they talked about, further, we need to understand, okay, then. I'm just done.
I have a question from you. How can we ensure that there isn't a new form of racism formed by genetic modification? You're saying that racism already exists, right? So how do we know that there's not going to be a new form of racism where they genetically modify the embryos, where they genetically modify people who are consenting? How do you assure that? And it's not necessarily a question to you, it's a question for everyone.
Can you just repeat your question once? Sorry.
How do we know for sure that there's not going to be a new form of discrimination? You said that already racism does exist. So how do you know that it's not going to further worsen the current situation?
I'll answer this question in one part. Firstly, okay, racism does exist. Racism will exist because of your thing. I agree. But is that racism worth killing someone for? Because we need to understand this technology saves lives, correct? Okay, they're being discriminated against, but at least they're alive, at least they're well, at least they aren't mentally, and at least they aren't physically, at least they aren't genetically disabled. Thank you.
My name is Haroon. Firstly, we would like to come back to the speaker and their case that they presented as a whole. Understand the fact that just because someone's genetically better doesn't mean they're going to win a race, they're going to win a competition. They have to be hardworking enough to be in the field as a whole. So when you compare the actually genetically important, significant entities with people who will modify themselves, that's a completely different case. That's like the Olympics, the last Olympics that we saw, how a transgender won a women race, considering she experienced themselves as a woman. Understand the fact that genetic modification would create a proper unfair basis of competition as a whole. Next, we come back to the other stances made that were about the disease solving. Understand the question at hand is about human potential. There's a proper difference between genetic needs and then human potential wants. Just because you want to have a proper IQ or a proper EQ doesn't mean you can compare this with a proper disease or an embryo implantation. Next, understand the basic consensus that this committee failed to realize. What is it? Discrimination. How does discrimination work? Let's collaborate as a whole to understand what discrimination occurs from. It occurs from characteristics, right? Age, gender, ethnicity. Now, let's put another characteristic as a whole, which is what? Genetic modification as a whole. We are going to see and visualize as a whole how genetic diversity is going to release a proper discrimination platform. Understand the fact that me and you will face discrimination as a whole on a genetic makeup, on a proper genetic modification transit. Understand the fact that this is going to lead to proper discrimination and hence racism as a whole. We need to understand the situation at hand is not going to solve problems, that this is going to escalate the problems as a whole. Lastly, we come to the point of employment. Let's see the employment sector as an example to collaborate as a whole. Will you employ someone who is genetically better, or will you employ someone who is better for the field? If you know someone's DNA has a lack of efficiency, are you going to employ them? Are they worth it? Yes. But are you going to employ them? No. Employment problems, a basic example of what my stance as a whole is.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I was a hiring manager and if a person comes up to me with an excellent IQ and an excellent managerial skills in that position, would I to fire him just because he had a genetic modification when he was maybe 12 or 13 years old or maybe 20 years old? No, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because industries require the skill. Industries require the output, ladies and gentlemen. They don't care if you got a genetic modification or if you were genetically gifted, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what they must realize is that if we were to genetically modify humans, even for like, IQ boosting or something, this would increase economic growth in the world, ladies and gentlemen. This would lead to industries giving more output. This would lead to GDPs increasing all over the world. This would lead to actual human growth, ladies and gentlemen. It would allow us to carry out more researches. If someone was to get an IQ boost, they will be allowed to carry out more extensive researches on science subjects, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, but that's not even the main point. The main point is, why was genetic engineering basically discovered? It was basically discovered to assist humans and all the things that are actually going wrong in the world, right? So genetic modification is just not limited to humans. It's also for the planet Earth. It's also for how we deal with our environment, ladies and gentlemen. It's also how we deal with animals. It's also how we save animals from extinction, ladies and gentlemen. If we were to not use genetic modifications, we won't be able to make products such as insulin, which is a cure for diabetes. We won't be able to produce alcohol, which is such a big industry in all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. If we were to completely ban genetic modification, it would lead to an economic recession. It would lead towards a very big economic slump, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, discrimination can never be resolved, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't see how genetic modification can lead to more discrimination, as it's only gonna help people in being better and also assist people in working towards removing discrimination. Thank you so much.
Okay, I would like to request all of you to please maintain cordiality. No face pulling, no smirks. That is going to deduct marks, okay?
My name is Hassan Tahir. One thing that the opposition keeps circling back to is the fact of discrimination. One thing that they fail to realize is that human feelings are not more important than human lives. If a new technology has the potential to help people live longer, to eradicate diseases, to help people reach the fullest of their potentials, would we not employ those things to make our world better for those people? If this technology is more widely available, then I don't see the need for discrimination, as this technology will be available for everybody and there will be no class system. Furthermore, I ask you that how can we allow this fear to paralyze us when the very technology we're discussing holds the power to be the greatest equalizer in human history? Imagine a world where genetic enhancements are not the privilege of the few, but the right of all. A world where every child, regardless of the circumstances of their birth, has access to the same potential for greatness. Impact on the communities that have been historically marginalized. Communities where opportunities have been scarce, where the cycle of poverty has seemed unbreakable. With genetic enhancement, we can break that cycle. We can give these communities the tools to rise, to thrive, to finally claim the opportunities that have long been denied to them. Just simply disregarding this entire technology over the basis of discrimination and inequality is not right, because this will lead to more people, the people who are already genetically not as good, they will be able to engineer themselves to be on par with the rest of the people.
My name is Ahmed Abdul Moiz. I'm from EMS High School. I'll be starting my rebuttal and debate in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, number one, let's consider the rebuttal that was presented about the fact that emotions are somehow less important than human lives. Understand that emotions can take place and can take form of various things. Consider the Israel-Gaza war that is happening currently. Understand that the Israeli people feel a certain sort of resentment towards the Palestinians. That resentment takes the form of the death of hundreds of thousands of people. Emotions can take the act and take the form of a lot of loss. They can lead towards the escalation of war and lead to death. Understand that emotions is a powerful tool. It has led to World War I. It led to World War II. It might as well lead to World War III. So understand that emotions aren't just said to be simply put. We see the great LGBTQ movement that is rising upwards from the West. What is that led by? Emotions. People feel connected. People feel unity. People feel embraced by a certain movement, and that feeling is what can radicalize and what can lead to a mass movement. Understand furthermore the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Understand that when you introduce something like genetic modification, you have to understand the Maslow's hierarchy of needs when you consider certain emotions. People have psychological needs, and then they have wants. Our topic is not revolving around planet Earth or the agriculture or how we can increase plantation. It's around enhancing human potential. And discussing that specifically, we need to discuss the case of Leila Hans, an important influencer within the United States of America. She did multiple modifications within her DNA and is now an advocate, teaching and guiding thousands of millions of people in USA specifically, including teenagers, about preventing genetic modification, about not genetic modifying themselves. Now, furthermore, understand that genetic modification, one simple experiment, one simple laboratory mass scale experiment of genetic modification, just to study it takes around 1.2 million US dollars. Understand how does that not create social inequality? What about the people that are facing food shortages? What about the child that cannot have a new bag on his first day of school? That money could have gone to that. That money could have erased that inequality, and that money could have prevented that discrimination from taking place in the first.
Before you start, you all talked about consent relating to embryos, but there are people who abort these same fetuses because they have genetic defects. So, would genetic modification not be preventing all these emotions and all the abortions that have to take place and give more autonomy to a woman's body? It's to any of you. Who would like to answer? Just raise your hands.
Now, this is another problem why genetic modification cannot entirely be successful. Understand that you have certain laws. For example, the Roe and Wade regulation that were introduced by the US Congress. That specific Roe and Wade regulation says that specifically you have certain lifespans, or you have the embryo of 6 months or a certain lifespan where a baby is developed before you can actually consider it as a living baby. Because we have a certain population issue, we believe that in order to create a successful genetic model or a genetic modification sample, we need to consider certain laws. And law regulation, as well as it might not be a part of the topic, is something that we need to consider in the future. Now, considering the rather horrible disputes that occur within the US Congress itself and within our own parliaments, this specific reason is another reason why we believe that genetic modification won't be successful in the next 20 years, because our politicians won't agree to susceptible and good and substantial laws that might actually allow for genetic modification to take place in a fruitful manner.
The question was on how genetic modification might be able to help babies with genetic defects. By the way, participants, now you have 1 minute and 30 seconds instead of 2 minutes so make sure that you speak accordingly.
Sorry, can you please read it one more time? I'm sorry.
The question was on how genetic modification might prevent the useless abortions of children with genetic defects.
Well, as far as abortions are concerned, we must first know about why abortions are taken into consideration. In the state of California, the bill was passed that women do have the right to supplicate for abortion, and there's a reason behind that. That's because all of those babies, most of them, 67% of them are illegitimate, and 37% of them are genetically troubled. And those abortions are mainly because the parents, they fear something, or fear social pressure, they feel some sort of pressure that they need to take into consideration. Now, those abortions that are to be linked to genetic modifications or some genetic problems, those are merely that's a very, very minimum margin there, because people do not get to know what the problems are. Many of the women who have children, let's again talk about the state of California. In California, many women who had known about their babies, their children, their fetuses, or genetic disabilities, what they did was that they kept the baby, irrespective of the genetic disorder of the fetus there. So it's really not a question of whether or not a woman should be able to abort the baby, or in terms of genetic disorders or not. It's a question of whether she should keep it in line with what the disorder is, because disorders, they're basically genetic.
To answer this question, we have to firstly understand the biological evidence we have. I will make a statement and give you a proper dismantling of the case as a whole. My statement here is genetic deficiencies are necessary. Why? Mother Nature created all of us so the best gene could survive. This is the basic concept that we all learn in our biology books, right? The best gene has to survive. The deficient gene cannot survive. This side of the debate proposes the fact that this is necessary for natural diversity and genetic diversity. When you're going to make every bad gene a good gene and make it survive, this is going to cause probable consequent harms and health risks as a whole. Why is this even a question when considering the fact that human diversity is going to be eradicated? Let's take an example, of course. Let's take an example where this house states that every gene wants to be at the optimal best, right? When every gene would be at their optimal best through human modification, would there be diversity? Would there be genetic diversity? No. Who is going to be prone to these diseases? All of us. Why? Because we're made of the same genetic type of phenotype and genotype. Understand the fact that genetic diversity is the main concept we have to understand. When it comes to the concept of abortion, this is where Mother Nature and the nature lands produces its proper dissection between the states that what is a good gene and what is a bad gene. So when we perform this action, we're clearly eliminating nature as a whole. Thank you.
In order to answer to your question, Shayan from BMI. In order to answer to your question, respected panel, you need to consider the point raised by my fellow delegate in which they mentioned how expensive the genetic modifications are. Let me state an example. If a middle income family in a developing country is expecting expecting an offspring with a genetic disability, can they afford the genetic modification to treat that disability? No, it's simple, they can't. But can they afford an abortion to get rid of that genetic disability? Yes, they can. So the point simply summarizes to the fact that the genetic modification as of right now is currently reserved for the very elite, and normal middle-aged wider public cannot afford the genetic modification to be used for exactly the needs purposes. Thank you.
Moving on, we're going to go to the next point. Should governments regulate the use of genetic modification to make sure that it's not misused?
Iman Sayed, and in 3, 2, 1. Governments definitely need to regulate genetic modification because there is a very thin line between biotechnology and bioterrorism. And we don't know when and how and where we're going to cross it, especially if we give a free hand to the scientists. Currently, many of these experiments have been already shut down because of the possible risks, such as in 2021, US and China have already injected human stem cells into a monkey's embryo. This research has been shut down because we don't know what the risks are and what it's going to result in. We don't know what kind of genetic mutation is going to occur. We don't know what kind of chimera is going to come into existence. We don't even know are you going to call that a human chimera, and are you going to call it an animal chimera? What kind of laws are you going to then apply to that? If we're not going to regulate genetic engineering, we will have to consider how we're going to regulate chimeras. So yes, we do need to regulate these experiments.
So, ma'am, do I have to answer or can I start my own argument?
Preferably, you should give a rebuttal, but if you have your own points, then you can obviously.
No, like the question you were asking, or can
Yes,
I
you can.
start to a rebuttal of the general
You can do
points?
both if you want.
Rebuttal. So, Sharam. So the first thing I've noticed is that it's been frequently mentioned that enhancements could only include things like makeup or personality, or an athlete could misuse them. But have you ever considered that two persons are in front of you, one with limbs that are perfectly working, one that is one that has no physical and mental disabilities, and another one which has no contact limbs, one that is permanently confined to a wheelchair. If you could save that person's life through genetic engineering, would you not call this ethical? Would you not call them an enhancement of human potential? The second thing I frequently noticed is that they've been mentioning the point of how high the risks are, of how the human population could be increasing. Are you saying that it's ethical to kill the human population? That it is ethical to kill people, that you want to kill a person, you want them to stay disabled for the rest of their life, you want them to be discriminated against. Why? If you make everyone stand on an equal footing, there won't be any discrimination. Around the world, there are about 100 million people who are suffering from genetic related diseases, and even more who are suffering from physical and mental disabilities. Do you want, this means that every 1 in 100 people. So do you want these people to live discriminated lives? Please answer this.
Just a quick answer. First of all, we don't have the technology as of now. We're not even considering if we can check for disabilities. So I think that question is in a void. No, we cannot. And secondly, if you know anything about the disabled community, they don't think of themselves as not having full potential. They believe that they can do anything that a normal human can. So what you're saying right now is that just because they're disabled doesn't mean that they cannot reach their full potential. So no, I don't think that's correct.
My name is Hassan Tahir. I'll be beginning my rebuttal. I'm appalled at the primitive arguments of the opposition of saying that the Darwin theory is correct and that survival of the fittest should be how our society moves forward. Everyone, please consider that if that was the case of how we approach things, then necessary procedures such as chemotherapy or other surgical procedures would be null and void. We could just throw them out the window. That the people who are disabled, they should stay disabled. You cannot fix people. You must realize that survival of the fittest was something we left behind before the scientific revolution. Due to the technological advancements in medicine and technology, our technology is developing at an unprecedented rate. And we should not stifle it, and instead we should embrace it, however, with regulations. We agree that government regulations are necessary. And that the problem of animal testing, I hope you guys do realize that even the makeup you're wearing, the nail polish you put on, all of these have been tested for years on animals. So I don't see why this is a problem now.
Ladies and gentlemen, their own speeches completely makes their case fall apart. Why? Because the biological theory they presented is not correct in its own right. Why? Ladies and gentlemen, there is this process called the natural selection, right? What happens is that eventually as the future generations, as the genes are passed on to the future generations, what happens is that the nature selects the best genes appropriate and then passes them on to the future generations as they are the dominant genes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what they don't realize is that if I were to genetically modify my gene because I have sickle cell anemia, right? If I were to genetically modify my genes of sickle cell anemia and to get a cure, it would not affect the train of genes that I'm on, right? Why? Because my reproductive cells are not mutated. They are passed on as they naturally would be passed on, right? So this completely makes a case fall apart, as it does not mean that if I were to genetically modify myself, it would affect the future generations. Thank you so much.
My name is Ahmed Abdul Moiz. I'm from EMS High School. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that when we talk specifically about regulations, we discuss them relatively. When we have certain sports or tournaments, or whether that be the Olympics, we have certain relative indexes and relative regulations that allow for people to participate in them. For example, consider certain aspects such as the weightlifting tournament. In the weightlifting tournament, before you actually fight or before you actually lift that particular weight, you need to be a certain amount of pounds, you need to be a certain amount of mass, you need to be a certain amount of weight. For example, if you're in a certain wrestling championship, or if you're a lightweight wrestler, you need to be at least 60 kilograms before you actually are allowed to fight in that particular manner. Number number two, understand that perception. Perception is the reason why most people allow for themselves to use genetic modification to enhance themselves. People feel that they may be ugly, people feel that they may not be the best looking, and so they'll move towards enhancing themselves through genetic modification. How can we control that? Well, we have Neuralink, Elon Musk's innovation. He said that it will cost around $1,200 in 2033, and that is the same price as an iPhone. Why not move towards a medium that is more affordable than a medium that costs a lot?
Okay, are we done with the rebuttals? हाँ, जो पहले नहीं बोले उनको पहले चांस देना है. उसके बाद I have a question to all of you after you're done.
Following on my previous delegate's point, Ryan Ghazanfer. Following on my previous delegate's point, to make one thing that I feel that a common consensus that has been pretty much the elephant in the room is that if we need to make human genetics to the point where it can access as many people as we're talking about, we need to make it more available. And we need to make it more available, we need more mass production on it, and we need a means to transfer it to almost every other embryo which needs said modification. Now for this, corporations will have to be involved, as they will only have they solely will have the caliber for the production and the sheer magnitude of demand and supply that will be required. Now, I am inclined to believe that across, if I have to take a page from human history, I'm inclined to believe that this can make another toxic industry which can cause which is incentivized on profit. For example, well, I'm out of time, so.
My name is Haroon and I'm from Lahore Grammar School. The first point that we would like to put to table is the major difference between genetic modification and then human body modification. This side of the house fails to realize the major distinction. Human body modification is easy, it's relative, and it's very common in daily life, such as your makeup, such as your implants. However, genetic modification is a proper term that has to be legalized, that has to have a proper consent, that has to have proper regulations. You cannot just put forward a null and void comparison between human body enhancement and then genetic modification as a whole. Why? Number one, because there's an ethical slippery slope. Why? Because there's no drawing of line to which we can genetically modify. There's no current law or rule that regulates the entirety of nations that provide the genetic modification rules or laws. The most common one used is the UNESCO Ethical of Bioethics. Understand the fact that it's not properly implemented. The major distinction when we come between human enhancement, body enhancement, and appearance enhancement is to understand that there is a proper line between this and then genetically modifying entities as a whole. Thank you.
Hisan Haider from FIS Rawalpindi. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable Chair, you need to understand that Team Opposition's entire case is completely mischaracterizing the situation. Their entire case is completely misconstruing what is occurring. When they came up here and they stated, a speaker of theirs stated, a toxic industry will be created. Honorable Chair, audience, I ask you how, what, why, what this may even look like, how it may even come into being. But furthermore, I'd like to tackle something stated earlier about the job market, about employment, about the fact that someone who's genetically better would be employed. But I have a single question to ask here. Wouldn't that be better that he is hired? Because we would have a higher production. When we have higher production, we have a lower cost of production. Things become cheaper to everyone. Things become more affordable to everyone. It ends up benefiting the entirety of society when we choose someone who is genetically better. So my question is, when someone is genetically better, when someone is better equipped to handle a situation, why should we stop them from handling that situation? It is in fact a very beneficial thing for us to happen.
On hai? Huh. Okay, so since we have had the arguments and the rebuttals, we need to arrive at some kind of consensus, because as everyone knows, things are not in black and white. So I want to know from each of you in 2 or 3 sentences, how do you think genetic modification can be regulated? Who should be the regulators? what should be allowed, what should not be allowed. Because obviously there are advantages and disadvantages. So we'll go serially from one end to the other. So we want a response from all of you, starting with Ayan here.
Okay, so how do we regulate genetic modification? Okay, so how do we regulate genetic modification, right? Genetic modification shall be regulated, and we also know that there are implications if genetic modification happens before a certain age, right? So what we can do is we could make a legal age for genetic modification to occur, right? For example, if the legal age for getting a driving license is 18, we could have a consensus from the doctors on what a legal age for a genetic modification could be. It could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years, depending on what the doctors think, as they are the best fit judges, right? Secondly, what we need to do is who should get a genetic modification, right? For that, each government shall have a proper committee that decides that who is eligible to get a genetic modification, as it's not a very common thing, right? So as of now, we need a proper committee which is consisting of medical scientists and doctors, which scrutinize each decision that who is eligible to get a genetic modification and who needs to get a genetic modification. Thirdly, what we also realize is that genetic modification can be a very expensive matter, right? So what we also need to regulate as the governments are that who is eligible for getting a aid for a genetic modification. For example, if a person is dying from a certain disease, is he eligible to get a financial aid in order to get the genetic modification?
Shall I state my name first? Talha Munsif. Well, I personally believe, shall I start? Well, I personally believe that initially a committee should be formed comprising of scientists and medical doctors and whatnot who do tend to have an experience in terms of genetic modification. But as it progresses on, as the trials they conduct the experiments and the results come, when they find that if they think that the initial results or the genetic modification is applicable to the public, it should be public. It should be under public regard. If something happens which is not in accordance to their expectations, they should completely eradicate it, because the more the public is involved, the more it's applicable to the scientists themselves.
My name is Hassan Tahir. Similarly, as to how we have multiple UN bodies, I believe that regulating a governing US body should be made who will regulate the use of genetic modifications. I also believe that it should be applicable for genetic diseases which are hereditary, such as chronic disease or Down syndrome, because eradicating those would be beneficial for all of humankind. Thirdly, I believe that as the opposition has very clearly helped us in this argument, that if it is only the price of an iPhone, which I may remind you that most of the population here can afford, prices can be regulated, as it is already proven. So I believe that regulating prices will not be an issue, as the Neuralink was also made by a corporation, and that I believe that this should be available to as many people as possible to prevent the risk of future genetic diseases from forming.
Can you repeat your question?
The question was, okay, so I'll repeat the question again, that how can genetic modification be regulated? And some of you missed this point. What should be regulated? What should be not allowed? What should be allowed? What should not be allowed? And who should do the regulations?
Hisan Haider from FIS Rawalpindi, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When we talk about how it would be regulated, who would be the one making these regulations, we need to understand who are the people specialized in these subjects. They're the gene specialists, they're the biologists, they're the people who spend their entire lifetimes researching and studying these stuff. So they have an objective viewpoint on them. Hence, the people making the laws on them should be people which consider it from a purely objective perspective, whether it's beneficial or risky for humanity. Further onwards, it would be like what regulations should take place. Firstly, there should be an age limit as a limit of consent. But aside from that, there should be, aside from the age of consent, there should be something that if a person's life is in danger, if an embryo's life is in danger, if they're being genetically disadvantaged by something such as Down syndrome and such, it should be cured regardless of age. At that point, consents should be ignored because it's saving a life. And quite frankly, if a person cannot have an opinion on their own life, I believe it's just stupid. Sorry for my language.
So, first thing, yes. The first thing for a regulation would to be introduced a standardized global procedure for the research. This would not involve a direct test on animals, but starting from bacteria all the way upwards to an actual human would reduce the number that's in living organisms, something that's been really stressed by the opposing side. The second thing would to be introduce a system which would make these technologies equitable for all. And the last fact would to be ensure a system that would only provide these genetic modifications on the basis of whether a person requires them or not. Not only in the case of health diseases, for example, in the case of protection forces, if they are given strength and intelligence, then it can easily be understood why. But for an athlete or for someone who does not need them, then it should be regulated that these people should not be allowed to access these technologies for their gratification of wants. Thank you.
My name is Haroon Safir, and I'll answer this question in 3 points. Number one, what would be regulated? We need to understand who is allowed to have genetic modification and who is not. Who is allowed is the person who needs it for a genetic deficiency that's going to cause a major medical deficiency or a disease as a whole. Who will not be regulated are the people who need it just for the human enhancement as a whole. When they talk about the age limit, yes, it might be 18, but what about the entities that are not mentally fit to have a consent or to understand what a consent is? Yes, right? In this case, what will happen is that their guardians or their parents will give the consent considering if there's a gender deficiency or not. Now comes to how it will be regulated. Understand the fact that the word regulated demands a law or a regulation, because whole of the population to be regulated as a whole, we need a law, right? Considering the fact we do not have a consensus law in major states, we have one that we researched on, which is the UNESCO bioethics law, which shall regulate the Ministry of Health, which shall have proper consensus and a scrutiny committee that shall work upon the guidelines of this law and regulations. So this is how who is going to be figured out. What is allowed or not, who are government, and what the regulations, the UNESCO laws. Thank you.
My name is Rayan Ghazanfar. Much like how my previous delegate said, I believe that we can come up with a common consensus. The government, more specifically, can come up with a common consensus and make regulations and laws which categorize if a newborn, for example, is eligible for treatment through genetic modification. For example, it would be blithe of me to say if a baby who is born with diabetes, for example, from his lineage is told that and is completely and we are completely able to eradicate that from him, it would be blithe of me to say that he is not eligible to be cured of something which I will say affects throughout the quality of his entire life, puts him on insulin use, puts him on so many other more costs which can detriment the entire structure of what he believes in. And this can apply for Down syndrome, autism, loss of limbs, everything. However, to say that the essence of human soul is to struggle and strive, as someone previously before said that someone who is genetically modified should be picked up by industries, the essence is to work hard and make sure that you are up to standard. If you're genetically modified, that entire field is vanished. It's decimated.
I'm Shayan. Having realized the fact that how dire the future awaits humanity if genetic modification and engineering was not moderated, it's of utmost importance that guidelines and limitations must be established by international health unions and bodies like the WHO, stating that genetic modification is only to be used where beings are suffering from terminal illnesses not treatable by any other means and their health is at a lethal risk. Except that scenario, genetic modification is to be used for no other purposes, including aesthetic and desired purposes, no matter the amount of finances offered. This will ensure that humans do not cross the boundaries set by the nature like we usually do, while also ensuring that the general public gains access to this technology as soon as possible, possibly saving millions of lives that are lost due to genetic factors and diseases, not creating unfair and injusticeful competitions among the humanity. Thank you.
I'm Iman Sayed from Beacon House Kirkham campus, and my fellow panelists have already focused on whether what age should be the limit and when people should be asked for consent and what procedures should be allowed and should not be allowed. So I would like to focus specifically on the regulatory system. We already do have regulatory systems in place, such as the United States, like we have them on national level and international level both. So we will have to continue that and having international agencies and national agencies, such national government bodies. We already have that in Japan, US, Singapore, which are doing it through risk levels and are managing it according to that. So that is going to be the first line. And then there are also going to be voluntary self-regulations, especially for experiments, because I believe that consent and what procedures should be done or not is really far into the future, because right now we're still stuck in the experimental basis. So we need to look into regulating those before we go about that. Thank you.
My name is Ahmed Abdulmoez, starting in 3, 2, 1. I'd like to introduce the Swedish 213 international model, which was internationally recognized by the United States of America and internationally approved by the United Kingdom in 2019. The model focuses on number one, identification through a relative index that allows to understand whether the individual in subject wants to enhance their human potential or is in fact a need. Then you put it through a risk assessment index, which utilizes how risky that particular surgery or that particular example may be for that individual. Then you utilize the machinery, you regulate that machinery and ensure that the centers that that machinery is put into are approved, and the people that use that machinery and are utilizing that machinery are internationally approved and have followed regulations that have been issued by the IES 2009 charter that is present in all governments, and specifically the Swedish 213 regulatory government. Thank you so much.
Participants, this was a great debate. You have 5 minutes to write down your concluding statements. You will have 1 minute for each per participant for your conclusions. You may start now. Your time is up. I hope everyone has written their concluding statements. You may start with your concluding statement. You will have 1 minute. Do remember that.
Ladies and gentlemen, to every decision, there are two sides, right? There are pros and there are cons. But we as humans, what we base our decisions on is how the cons and pros outweigh each other, right? If something has more pros than its cons, then we obviously make decision in favor of the thing, right? So what I believe is that the genetic modification has much more pros than its cons, right? Maybe there are some cons, but there are the pros that are very big. They are revolutionary pros, right? Secondly, what we must realize is that if we have the ability to save our lives, if we have the ability to save our climate, if we have the ability to progress further as a scientific community, then we must accept the genetic modification, right? Well, we may have some rules and regulations, but even if these rules and regulations are misused on a smaller scale, we should still be able to accept this genetic modification. And what we must ask all of ourselves is the one question we must ask: is our right, permission to complete sentence, is our right to life absolute? Is it our consensus to practice it? If it is, you have your answer.
But in conclusion, I'd like to utter that even drinking pure water has its defects, such as pH imbalance and water intoxication. And in the pursuit of truth, you must risk taking the chance that further exceeds beyond your level of expertise. And I truly believe that we should go for the things which was stated by my fellow debater here, that those which have more pros than cons, because even drinking water has pros and cons, yet it's essential for our life. That's my conclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable dais, I believe that the committee as a whole has somewhat reached a unanimous conclusion. An international body should be formed of medical specialists to create a law regulating the use of genetic engineering, which will also include a scrutiny committee. Genetic engineering should be available and regulated for all people towards the whole public, and not just for physical enhancements, but also to ensure that genetic defects will be eradicated. This will ensure that lives will be saved as much as possible without putting social equality at risk, as it will be available to all. Thank you.
Can I start? Hisan Haider, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable Chair, let me tell you why we take this debate and why we absolutely take this debate. Because we prove the benefit to the collective, to the humanity as a collective. We prove how they would benefit by the cost of production lowering, how they would benefit by a genetically modified people being employed. And their argument to that was, you are eliminating struggle. Honorable Chair, audience, wouldn't you want struggle to be eliminated? Further, we stated how lives would be saved in our world, and their counter argument was, some people should die. That is a highly insensitive and incentric statement on which both you and I can recognize. Further, we proved how discrimination would be lower as disabilities disappear and people wouldn't be harassed, people wouldn't be bullied on the basis of these disabilities. And they just refuse to interact with that point at all. Further, they mischaracterized the word potential for half the debate, which literally just voided the purpose of the debate and didn't even leave room for us to speak in the debate. Thank you.
So first of all, this discussion has agreed to the effect that ethically it is quite possible to modify the body to save a life. Based on the latest discussion, we also have agreed that sufficient regulatory approaches can be put into place to prevent misuse. I also believe that while the risks are present, the benefits of saving and leading a life to a good future is a cause that we can handle any negative consequence for. This is a cause that we can even fight as inequality by putting marginalized communities on an even footing. The technology can also be regulated to prevent misuse, and even then people can be guided through various forms of speakers to prevent these unnecessary modifications that could lead to misuse. Throughout time, mankind has always opted to follow the path that would be for its collective benefits, and even after that, it has always decided to bear the collective benefits. I ask you all to do this now.
My name is Haroon Zafir, and for a good conclusion, we need two problems and then their solution. Problem number one are the moral problems. Understand the fact that if we put up genetic modification, we're going to completely change the meaning of life, the human identity as a whole. Me and you are made up of our defects, our compromises, and our struggles that we take. If we inhumanly modify every single entity here, we're going to disrupt the meaning of life, our human identities as a whole. Next comes the practical problem. When it comes to the practical problem, understand that genetic modification is unchangeable. Once it's done, it cannot go back. Understand, this is not a normal medical procedure that has proper solutions. If you're genetically modified when as an embryo form, there's no possible course of going back. Lastly, understand the solutions that we propose as the opposition. We propose a proper medical ministry enhancement, which has a proper scrutiny committee that guides the regulations on the laws made by UNESCO bioethics. We cannot have laws of US apply here, considering that all of these states and majorly states are part of UNESCO, considering their ethics as a whole. Lastly, our last distinction will be permission to complete the sentence between if it is a genetic modification need or it is a genetic modification want. Thank you.
My name is Rayan Ghazanfar. As humans, the very culmination of our evolution is to face at the adversity stood before us. The adaptability factor of the human DNA is a profound testament to this. It was the driving force which has made kingdoms, and it fueled every scientist and every philosopher in the Renaissance. Hence, I implore every audience member here to ask themselves, or even my fellow delegates, whether we use the gimmick of today's debate to eradicate adversity or strengthen prosperity.
Fellow delegates and my name is Shayan. Fellow delegates and respected chairs, as we come near the conclusions, it's important that we restate our stances and state why do we believe so. Genetic modification as of right now is only reserved for the very social elites and not for the wider public. As long as that's the case, it must not be applied to the humans and only be researched. Secondly, the genetic modification should only be used for life-saving purposes, which is an absolute necessity for the continuity of Homo sapiens. It must never be used for purposes that will put individuals above the normal threshold, considering the fact that life-saving genetic modifications will bring them just to the normal threshold. Thank you.
I'm Iman Sayed, and starting in 3, 2, 1. As of now, we don't even know if genetic engineering is possible in humans or not, let alone discussing the ethics of it. Obviously, if the procedure is done to for medical purposes, then it should be allowed. But personally, I just want to draw a line between medical procedures and someone transplanting a human head atop a bear's body because it has more strength. Lastly, I just like to end with a bit of food for thought. Maybe we are too busy covering from AIs taking over to recognize the potential chimeras people are wanting to create. Thank you.
My name is Ahmed Abdul Moiz. I'm from Lahore Grammar School. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the massive reasons why people get genetically modified in the first place is because they feel people have a certain perception of them. Why not use Neuralink? Neuralink, if implanted in every single individual out there, will remove any perception any individual has of each other. If that perception is removed, where is there any racism? Is there going to be any division at all? Not at all, because your perception is going to be altered forever. But that's not the point. In 1913, on a December during World War II, German and Russian soldiers came together to celebrate Christmas Eve. We need to remember that in this race of life, they left their enhanced weapons that enhance their nation's potential for humanity. We need to understand that in this race for life, this genetically modified experiment may lead to more differentiation, more social class divisions, more economic disparity, and will lead to further divisions within our humanity. We need to come together. We need to realize our differences and accept them and move on, so we can sit in the same room and not talk about what's enhancing me and you and how that makes you different from me.
Concluding our debate, this was a very fruitful debate, and I wish you all the best of luck. You may all be seated. There will be a 5-minute break, after which we will commence the panel discussion. You may all go back to your seats. Thank you so much. Attention everyone, we will be starting with the panel discussion. All the panelists are requested to come up on stage. Abdur Rahman Talha from Behriya College, Anchorage. Abir Ahmed from SLS. Noor Fatma from Modern Age Public School. Muhammad Aman Sheikh. Muhammad Ibrahim bin Shahid. Rayan Khan Jadoon. Sadan Talha. Yashfa Maheen. And Shahir Ahmed. Just a friendly reminder, you have 2 minutes for your opening statements, after which there will be a discourse session. If there is a very clear for and against for this panel, then you can sit as for and against. Lekin panel mein there wasn't a clear cut for and against team as there was in debate. You may start. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abdurrahman Talha. I am from BCA. By 2060, UN expects there to have been 160 million migrants who have migrated due to climate change. That's Okay. That's a solid 1/50th of the world's population. So the question is clear. Who should take responsibility for these migrants? Who should help them? I believe it should be the countries who have emitted the most CO2, who are the primary cause for the migration of these people. This, however, cannot be matched by one country alone. It will require cooperation between the entire world. As such, some countries will take responsibility for housing these migrants, while others will take financial responsibility for providing them resources and paying for their houses. In order to help those who are truly climate refugees, we should develop a legal framework to help those who are truly in need. These people will include those from the poorest backgrounds who have nowhere else to go. Lastly, we can help these climate refugees by sending up NGOs to help them. Moreover, we can also develop technologies such as sustainable and how do I put it? Climate resilient houses.
Participants, it's perfectly fine if you can choose to have time. You can think it through. You don't have to rush.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Abir Ahmed from SLS. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and its impact on human migration is undeniable. Climate change is no longer a distant environmental challenge. It's a present-day humanitarian crisis that is pushing people from their homes. Climate refugees, those displaced by rising sea levels, droughts, and extreme weather events, are growing in numbers. This displacement is not just a personal tragedy for those affected, but a trigger for broader global instability. As communities collapse under environmental pressure, the ripple effects extend to economic disruption, political instability, and conflict across borders. It is a crisis that calls for urgent global action, not only to address the causes, but also to manage its consequences. Climate change displaces an estimated 20 to 30 million people each year. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that by 2050, the number could reach hundreds of millions if global warming continues unabated. Rising sea levels are threatening the existence of entire nations, like the Maldives, while desertification and water shortages are pushing populations out of sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. As climate refugees flee their homes, they often move into regions that are already under economic or social strain. This leads to competition over scarce resources like water, food, and housing. In countries like Sudan, we've already seen how climate change intensifies conflicts over resources. When migration crosses international borders, it can strain diplomatic relations and increase tensions between neighboring countries.
So I'm Noor Fatma. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. What would you do if your home, your community, and everything you have ever known were swallowed by the rising seas? Where would you go if the land beneath your feet cracked and crumbled under relentless droughts? How would you survive if the very environment that once sustained you became uninhabitable? In 2014, the people of Kiribati, a small island nation in the Pacific Ocean, faced exact these questions. Rising sea levels driven by climate changes threatened to engulf their entire country. Desperate for a solution, President Anote Tong purchased 6,000 acres of land in Fiji, over 1,000 miles away, to serve as a potential new home for his people. Kiribati's plight is a stark reminder that climate change is no longer a distant threat, it's a present-day reality. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, up to 216 million people could be displaced due to climate changes. These individuals, often referred to as climate refugees, face an uncertain future as they lack formal recognition and legal protection under international law. The principle of non-refoulement, the backbone of refugee protection, prohibits sending individuals back to life-threatening conditions. But is it enough to sustain the lives of millions of climate refugees? Secondly, the Paris Agreement and the principle of CBDR, that is common but differentiated responsibility, states that those who contributed and those who contributed most to the climate change must take the lead in offering solutions. As Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, has rightly said, I quote, climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment, I unquote. So I believe that this is not just a matter of policy or law or principle, it's a test of our global humanity. The decisions we'll make today will definitely shape the lives of millions tomorrow. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Ibrahim bin Shahid. Climate is a major issue of these days. This issue started from 1800s climate is an important issue of our society these days. This all started when humans, the main creatures who used the power resources in order to improve their lives. This is the basic instinct of our humans. Due to this, we have caused great damage to our society. During this time, we have not encountered the massive damage we have done to the people that live here in this planet. Like Elon Musk, he is planning on going to Mars. He's already started many ventures to do that. We are focusing on rather leaving this planet than improving this. We have not probably given this attention, as we have always focused on what is scarce, not on what we have in abundance. And we always focus that what we have already is not that important, or we can just brush it off like it's nothing. That is wrong. We have been doing this from a long time. This is the best example I can think of is the Maldives, Kiribatis. They are literally going below the sea level. They are not going to survive. They are going to make many refugees. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Aman Sheikh, and I start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Imagine being forced to flee your home, not because of war, not because of politics, but because the land underneath your feet is literally disappearing, or because the air that you breathe is becoming uninhabitable. This is the reality of millions of climate refugees whose lives are upended by climate change, a crisis that knows no borders. The question now is not if people will get homeless, but who bears the responsibility. Today we face a moral crossroads. Will we stand by and watch, or will we, as a global community, rise to the challenge and extend the hand of responsibility to those vulnerable? So today we have 4 points of discussions. I'll move on to the first point, which is what are countries' obligations towards climate refugees. I'll highlight 3 obligations. First of all, moral obligation, which is obvious. The developed nations are the primary contributors of climate change. Thus, they bear the responsibility to help those who suffer the consequences of their actions. Secondly, we have legal obligations, and thirdly, humanitarian obligations, because obviously developed nations are possessors of vast resources. Thus, they are expected to uphold human rights regardless of the cause of displacement. Moving on to the second point of discussion, which is how can international corporations address the challenges faced by climate refugees? First of all, shared responsibility. International corporations can lead to the concept of shared responsibility, because obviously not individual nations cannot counter this climate change, but we as a global community should counter this crisis. Secondly, financial assistance. International corporations should provide funding and resources to support countries which are most affected by climate change. Thirdly, legal frameworks. Legal frameworks are of utmost importance, and international corporations should lead to the creation of legal frameworks officially recognizing climate refugees. Thank you.
My name is Rayan Khan Jadoon, and I'll be starting my debate in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, what are climate refugees? Climate refugees are people who have been forced to leave their home due to severe impacts of climate changes. But what does this have an effect on us? Well, mass changes migration from strained resources to infrastructure. Without the help to prepare for prepare, withstand, or recover from climate-related shocks and stresses, there are also increased risks of becoming displaced again. Imagine being forced to leave your home and being displaced from your loved ones or your family. Well, there are a few countries that support these climate refugees. For example, Ethiopia takes the most climate refugees according to IDMC. There are a few responsibilities to individuals as well, like humanitarian responsibility. Climate change displaces people due to the extreme weather events like sea level rise. Assisting climate refugees can help prevent the regional instability and promote global peace. There is a shared impact of climate refugees as it affects all countries, meaning there should be a shared responsibility rather than a country being helping these refugees alone. Thank you.
My name is Siddhant Talha, and today I'll be presenting my view on this topic. UN suspects that by 2060 there will be 220 million climate affectees. This issue cannot be solved by one country alone, but countries need to work together to solve this issue. Current climate refugees live in slums and work very low-paying jobs and dirty conditions. When refugees move to an area, they aren't able to support their families and struggle to survive. So who should be held responsible? I think countries who are developed and are causing high carbon emissions should be held responsible, and there should be legal frameworks to support them.
Participants, please address the audience. It's perfectly fine if you're paper reading, but do try to address the audience.
Distinguished panelists, respected audience, and fellow debaters, my name is Shahid Ahmed Arsalan, and today I stand before you to discuss one of the most pressing and urgent challenges of our time, the issue of climate refugees and our collective global responsibility to address their plight. Climate refugees are people who have been forced to leave their homes due to severe impacts of climate change, such as rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and prolonged droughts. According to a report by the World Bank, by 2050, we could see over 143 million migrants who have been displaced across the sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America alone. These are not just numbers. These are real people facing an uncertain issue due to a crisis they did not create. So what should be our response? Today, I will discuss the obligations of countries towards climate change, the importance of international cooperation, the need for a distinct legal status, and how we can support affected communities in adapting to and mitigating the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
My name is Yashva Maheen, and I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Today, we confront one of the most pressing issues of our time, the plight of climate refugees. As climate change accelerates, entire communities are being displaced by rising sea level, extreme weather events, and environmental degradation. The global crisis demands urgent and coordinated action from the international community. Countries have an obligation to recognize and support climate refugees, especially developed countries, as they have contributed most to this issue. The climate refugees have no legal status, no right, no protection, no support, nothing. They lose property, livelihood, and personal belongings. And when they travel from one place to another, and it takes a lot of time, diseases spread. International cooperation is essential to address the challenges faced by climate refugees. No single nation can tackle this issue alone. By working together, more accurate results can be. Countries can share resources, create frameworks for resettlement, and establish financial mechanisms to support both the refugees and countries that host them. Only through collective action can we manage effectively the scale and complexity of this crisis. We must advocate for the expansion of existing refugee conventions or the creation of any legal framework to ensure that climate refugees receive the protection and recognition they deserve. Thank you.
So basically, your opening statements are done. We're going to start with the discussion phase now. I would like to ask a question from all of you. This is how it's going to work. How do we balance the rights of climate refugees with the rights of countries to control who they let through their borders?
Associated question would be if you could first address whether climate refugees should be allowed to stay in their own countries, in their own environments, and provided support there, or should they be taken to another country, or which would of course have its own associated problems regarding a different culture, a different language, and all the problems that they may face there. So if you could address both questions together.
You can raise your hand for whoever wants to answer first. It's not compulsory.
So I believe this question is regarding the legal status of the climate refugees. So first of all, background. Currently, according to the 1951 Refugee Convention, there is no distinction for climate-related refugees. So within their countries, they are often classified as IDPs, that is internally displaced persons. And when they are crossing borders, they may not receive any kind of a legal recognition because they do not fit into the traditional definition. So I believe they should have a right to be known, to have a distinct, to have a distinct recognition. So I believe I have proposed legal status for it. So it has two parts. Within a country, they should be categorized as a distinct part of IDPs, internally displaced person, where it should be the responsibility of the government to provide healthcare, education, and residential facilities. Secondly, if they're crossing borders, if they're traveling to some other countries, they should be recognized. And I think for this, the legal, as I mentioned, the 1951 Refugee Convention, it should be expanded, and they should also be given some kind of a legal status if they're traveling to any other country they want.
Would be is better for them to stay in their own country and be provided for there, or to be moved to another country?
I think this depends on the personal preferences. I think if a person has a family, they should stay in the country. But if a person is single or who has lost his loved ones in the disasters, storms, and earthquakes, they can travel to some other countries.
Would someone else like to build up on this argument?
Could you repeat your question, please?
There were two questions. One was whether the displaced refugees should stay in their homeland and be provided and funded there, or should they seek asylum in another country. And the second question was how should countries regulate these refugees who enter their borders?
First of all, we're talking about climate refugees. They are the victims over here. We're not talking about terrorists. We're not talking about some people who endanger us. But we're talking about the victims of the problems that the developed nations create. The refugees are going to developed nations for help, and these are the developed nations that are the instigators of climate change. They cause climate change, thus they have the moral obligation to let them in, because their actions, the consequences for their actions are climate refugees are facing those consequences of their actions. Thus, they have the moral obligation to let them in. And we're talking about victims over here. They're victims of a disaster. Thus, they should morally let them in. And to answer the second question, I believe that going to another country would be the perfect option, because obviously a country which cannot control climate change, how can it support its people? How can it support the refugees? Because obviously climate change would affect a whole country as a whole. Thus, I believe that they should move to another nation for a better life. Thank you.
You may speak first, and then after that.
One of the first steps is to expand international law to recognize climate refugees. The 1951 Refugee Convention does not currently cover those displaced by environmental causes, leaving them without the protections afforded to those fleeing war or persecution. Funding adoption and resettlement efforts, wealthier nations need to increase their financial contributions to climate adaptation funds like the Green Climate Fund, supporting countries in building resilience, whether through better water management, sustainable agriculture, or infrastructure.
To answer your question, I believe there are two possibilities. One, either the country has been disaster struck so badly that they have to forcefully flee, or second, either it is local. There's a local drought which forces them to flee. I believe in this case, it should be the best option and that the immigrant should stay within the country. This also cuts the cost for transportation, as well as allows them to stay with their communities. By staying in their country, they also avoid potential racism and potential racism. In this case, and to limit the number of refugees entering the country, there will be a proper system set up to allow certain refugees who really need to escape their country.
Isn't it better that more money and effort be funded into helping the countries affected by these climate refugee crisis to adapt and to expand their finances enough that they can actually cater to these refugees, rather than to fund the fleeing and the entry of refugees into different countries?
In many cases, returning or staying is not an option because the land has become uninhabitable, such as in areas where sea level has risen. Then climate refugees can contribute to the global community and economies elsewhere rather than struggling in devastated areas with no future. They also bring long-term benefits to the host countries, like culture diversity, entrepreneurship, and if we give them financial support to rebuild the areas, there is no guarantee that a flood or extreme weather events may happen again, and it'll just be a waste of money and time, and there will be more loss of lives. Countries that are affected have contributed least, so it is unfair that they should be the one working on rebuilding the infrastructure or whatever is destroyed there. And the countries that have contributed most are just sitting there and just giving them financial support while working on their own economies and stuff, rather than helping the others in the affected countries thank you.
So I believe that the communities can be supported in adapting and mitigating the effect of climate change by enhancing the local resilience. For example, investing in local infrastructure such as flood defenses, drought-resistant crops can significantly boost the community resilience. For example, Japanese, as they face earthquakes frequently, so they have built earthquake-resistant homes. So I believe that the government and the officials should invest in creating an infrastructure. According to World Bank report, investing in resilient infrastructure can save up to $4 for every $1 spent in disaster prevention. So I think it's very important to invest in the infrastructure. If the government of a country cannot, they should take the help of some developed nations.
But wouldn't it be, do you wish to speak? But wouldn't it be more difficult to fund so many countries that all of you mentioned that are affected by the climate refugee crisis? Because, like one of the panelists mentioned, there's no guarantee that the climate crisis might not occur again. So wouldn't it technically be a waste of money, or would it not be not a sound investment into for the government? You may speak, Abir.
Ensuring access to housing, education, and legal protections for climate refugees. It is a moral and ethical imperative that this is not just about economics or security, it's about basic human rights. The countries most affected by climate displacement are often the one least responsible for causing climate change. Meanwhile, the wealthier nations with higher emissions are insulted for its immediate impacts.
Would anyone like to build on to this?
The choice of whether to move to another country or stay in their country is based on their personal preferences, meaning if their family's there, so they would choose to be with their family rather be alone. And second, it would be based on the economic condition of a country, how well the country is able to recover from the disaster, and if they're forced to flee, like if their homes are destroyed, so they can go to another country. But if they can't afford the transportation costs, they should stay in their own country. But other countries have responsibilities as well, as they can provide financial support to these affected countries. But there should be legal frameworks for these refugees. Currently, international law and most national policies don't address climate refugees as other refugees. Citizenship is more permanent and legal commitment than temporary refugee status. Granting citizenship can provide climate refugees with stability and access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities.
Could you repeat the question, please?
The question was about how finances should be regulated and whether or not if investing them into the country affected by the climate crisis is a logical and sound decision.
Okay, so let's divide this into two sides. First of all, we'll divide countries which are affected to an extent that the climate crisis cannot be improved. For those countries, I do not think that finances would work, but the refugees should go on to some other nations for refuge. And then come the nations which are obviously the climate crisis is growing over there, but it has not affected to such an extent that it cannot be controlled. Thus, these nations are the ones which should be given financing, and they can improve the crisis and improve the disaster preparedness for futures, and they can maintain the number of population, and climate refugees do not have to migrate from over there. But the nations which are affected to a lot of affected by this crisis a lot, those are the nations that deserve their people to go to other nations for refuge.
I'd just like to add something more to my answer. Ignoring climate refugees will only lead to greater inequality, deeper instability, and more conflict in the future. We must ensure that our response to climate change is guided by the principles of fairness, justice, and shared responsibility. Addressing climate change and the displacement it causes is not optional. It is essential for the stability and securing and the security of our world. The time to act is now before the crisis escalates beyond our control.
Refugees can be also taken as a benefit. Many countries face underpopulation. We can send them there. This will not only help us to make profit, but we can also provide them benefit. We can provide them incentives, better incentives, and help them to live a better life. It's not only important to help them improve their lives. We have to also improve their country, their homeland. We have to provide them financial aid in order to improve their problem-ridden country, in, like, for example, the countries in the South America which are facing sea level issues. China in the previous days have started to make more islands by using sand. They place sand more and more in the ground in order to make islands which are habitable. This can also be done at small scale, as very expensive. It can be helped to level out the sea level which has consumed the islands. Thank you.
But shouldn't there be any policy? Would anyone like to speak first? You can answer first, then I'll go on next.
To answer your question, I would like to say first, dear audience, do we not all agree that every refugee saved is another refugee becoming a scientist, an entrepreneur, a worker for his community? All of these things are invaluable. The more refugees we save, the more technology we build, the more humanity progresses as a whole. Second, how do we finance it? I believe we can finance it by taxing the heavy polluters, the oil industry, the energy industry. the clothing industry, the meat industry. By taxing these, we can make a huge amount of money, which can then be used to fund help organizations to help climate refugees. Thank you.
I'd build on to this. Should there not be any policies that be put into place relating to quotas for jobs, educations, and in general work? Because it's a stigma, especially in the West, that refugees overtake most of the jobs. So how would you make policies for climate refugees who aren't even recognized by the Refugee Convention?
First of all, we should involve the local communities in the resettlement process, as they are more likely to support refugee integration and help manage resources effectively. And when the refugees come, it's mostly the people that claim such stuff, not the government. And the people of the host country don't argue that they're taking over our resources or taking most of the jobs. Then accepting the local communities should understand that that accepting refugees is protecting human lives and upholding human rights. Then there are also long-term benefits, and the refugees, they bring with them cultural diversity, which enriches the society and foster innovation. And there are different skills, and people start new businesses, which in one way develops the countries. Plus, the countries get recognition for taking in climate refugee and helping the humans and upholding the human rights. Thank you.
Anyone like to build on to that?
Yes. Oh,
First. I would encourage the rest of you to participate as well, as it is not fair if only a few specific people are speaking.
Current laws are outdated and do not address the reality of climate displacement. A new legal framework is essential to provide climate refugees with the same protection as those fleeing persecution or conflict. Additionally, countries need to be prepared for the arrival of climate refugees, not through just short-term aid, but through long-term integration plans. This includes creating pathways for legal migration, providing job training, and ensuring access to healthcare and education. Developed nations, particularly those responsible for the bulk of carbon emissions, must take the lead. This means both reducing emissions to slow the pace of climate change and offering financial and logistical support to countries facing mass displacement. Resettlement programs must also be expanded to support resettlement programs must also be expanded in wealthier nations. Climate refugees cannot be left in limbo or confined to refugee camps indefinitely. A comprehensive approach that includes permanent resettlement and legal protection is crucial.
Could you please repeat the question?
The question was that should policies be implemented for climate refugees, and for context, climate refugees are not recognized by the Refugee Convention. So should governments not impose specific policy to provide a specific quota for jobs and education?
This is a very large scale problem. We can solve this by dividing into very small problems. Like, for example, the refugees of Afghanistan. There are a lot of Afghani refugees in Pakistan. Ma'am, I'm just giving an example. If you're talking about climate refugees, we can talk about the issues that, like, the South African people who are facing droughts and all the disease spread areas. We can solve that by taking it to small scale. We can take small part of their communities and divide them into separate colonies type. So we could help separate them separately. If we do it on large scale, it would be very difficult. If we start from small and then go big, that's way easier, and it would also benefit them and would prevent racism from spreading quickly.
Dear audience, as climate refugees are such a huge problem, and these refugees who have been helped also need jobs, I suggest we use these climate refugees to help climate refugees. You see, using the saved people to help other people. This will also help the people they are helping, empathize with them, leading to better results. Also, to avoid the stigma of refugees, we should spread awareness as that is where all stigmas start.
Moving on, I'm going to ask from the right side of the panel the specific question: how shouldn't the countries that produce the most carbon emissions be taxed or have to face some consequences for the carbon emissions that have led to this refugee crisis? And how do we implement these taxations or these policies?
To prevent global warming, we must commit to reducing greenhouse gases emissions through policies and regulation and international agreements. For example, the Paris Agreement, which agreed on 50% emission of the American industries. We can also develop new technologies reducing emissions. For example, a technology that uses lesser fossil fuels to produce some energy. We can encourage the adoption of sustainable practices in the industry and transportation. And we can spread public awareness and education. For example, we can teach in schools about what happens if there's too much carbon emission in a country.
But how is this related to policies and how implementing them on countries which is high carbon emissions?
Two policies. First, carbon taxation, and secondly, carbon trading. Firstly, I'll start with carbon taxation. So we should set a specific amount, specific percentage that countries would be allowed to produce this and this much carbon emissions. If they exceed, they should be heavily taxed. And secondly, moving on to carbon trading. So if some nations, such as I'll give an example of Pakistan, if it fails to complete its objectives, such as, for example, the limit is 50% carbon emission annually. But if Pakistan makes 30% and 20% is left, it can trade 20% to developed nations such as USA, which are in need for more production of carbon in exchange for money. Thus, Pakistan will receive funding and USA will receive more percentage of carbon, allowance of more percentage of carbon, thus it can produce more carbon emissions, and Pakistan can use that money to work on the climate crisis. Thank you.
Firstly, as said right now, they should be taxed after after a limit is prescribed and they exceed that. But if we force them to take in the climate refugees as they contributed the most, then it would not be such a good option, because this may lead to discrimination and racism by the government and locals both, as they are forced to take in those people. They can help by financial support to vulnerable nations to help them adapt to the climate change, build resilience, or to help them in the migration costs. Then international funds specifically aimed at assisting climate refugees, ensuring that displaced people have access to basic needs and opportunities for resettlement. Policies and legal frameworks, the developed countries should take the lead in creating them. And they recognize and protect the climate refugees, as the definition of climate refugee is does not include the people displaced by climate events. Thank you.
So, talking about it statistically, China's contribution to the carbon dioxide emission is 28.6%, America 16%, India and Russia 5.4%, and Pakistan only 0.78%, not even 1%. So, I think that the countries should have policies. There should be some kind of a limit to carbon dioxide emission, and if the carbon dioxide emission is more than the limit, then the country should be fined, and that fine should be used to raise funds and resources for the people. In this regard, there is a very important principle. The first is the Paris Agreement, and then is this principle CBDR, that is common but differentiated responsibility, which clearly states that the countries who are major contributors of carbon dioxide emission and indirectly to the climate change, they should play a greater role in helping the climate refugees in this regard.
Your discussion phase is over. You have now 5 minutes to write down your closing statements. I would advise that you mention potential laws implemented, as most of you did not mention any when asked. So I would advise that you also mention policies. Your time starts now. Participants, your time is up. We will go it's the same order we did last time. You may start with your closing statements.
As we have discussed already, the countries who have historically contributed the most to emissions will be the ones who pay the most. So, for example, if a country has globally emitted 20% of all climate emissions, they shall pay for 20% of all climate refugees. This will be in the form of paying for either climate measurements to prevent the creation of more climate refugees. For example, stop the creation of flood banks to stop floods, or the creation of hurricane-resistant houses, floating houses which can adapt to rising water levels. In the case of climate refugees migrating to another country, they shall be provided with work, appropriate living spaces in certain areas, and they should also be provided education for free. However, if possible, the climate refugees should stay in their own country. The country should cooperate together to create measures against climate change, be it that to globally cut emissions and impose fines on each other if they fail to convert 5% of their emissions energy into renewable ones.
As my fellow delegate said, that the countries which are involved in global warming must also pay. For example, if as my fellow delegate said, that the countries must also pay taxes. Those who were involved in long-term carbon emissions. This includes providing access to education, vocational training, and healthcare, as well as ensuring that refugees have legal pathways to work. International organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund should support host countries with funding and expertise to help manage the economic impacts of climate migration. By acting now, we can turn the climate refugee crisis into an opportunity for economy revitalization. It is a chance to invest in human capital, expand labor markets, and create a more resilient global economy.
As we conclude this discussion, let us remember that the plight of climate refugees is not an environment issue. It's a human one. There are mothers, fathers, children, and elders who, through no fault of their own, find themselves at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The rising seas, extreme droughts, and devastating storms are not just statistics. They are harbingers of lost homes, fractured communities, and disrupted lives. The moral and legal obligations we have discussed today are not just abstract concepts. They're all calls to actions. The principle of non-refoulement, the CBDR, the imperatives of global cooperation and responsibility of nation are all the framework that can provide potential protection to the climate refugees. When it comes to policies, I believe that there should be policy regarding the carbon dioxide emission, which is a major contributor of global warming. As Christiania Figueres, former UN Secretary General, has rightly said, I quote, "We cannot close our eyes to the suffering of others," I unquote. Can I speak, please? Okay, so what solution I have from my side is that there should be planned relocation and resettlement instead of temporary asylum, collective rights for local populations, international assistance for domestic migrants, international burden sharing, the most important. So I would like to end my closing statement with these few beautiful lines. Together we stand on the edge of change, where choices we make can rearrange. With every step, with every voice, we hold the power, we have the choice.
Industries in the problem of refugees can be solved by making a policy where refugees can be divided into small groups, so there cannot be a majority. We can distribute them in the countries with underpopulation and provide them jobs and opportunities to improve their lives. We should also tax them with their consent how much we should take from them, so we could improve their lives, and we could also help rebuild their country so they could return one day with a prosperous future. Also, we could also place certain quotas on the different countries with high carbon footprint. We can also introduce decarbonization by like the sulfur content can be removed, and by placing filters, removing reducing greenhouse gases, and this could help us in improving our community and help us in the long run and protect us from future disasters.
As we've already seen that climate change is not a distant problem, it's already here, displacing millions of people and challenging our very understanding of human rights and global responsibility. My argument has laid out that countries should have both moral and legal obligations to address the plight of climate refugees. First and foremost, international corporations should make legal frameworks to formally recognize refugees so that they can be eligible for help, climate refugees. And thirdly, provision of financial support so that we can rise to the challenge. Fourth and foremost, we should have carbon trading and carbon taxation. They should be catalysts in factories to reduce the effect of harmful gases and converting them into less harmful gases. Moreover, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all humans should have access to basic fundamental human rights. Thus, these climate refugees are also humans, and they should have the same rights even if they go to another country because they are seeking refuge. Can I conclude? Climate change does not recognize borders, and neither should our compassion. To turn our backs now is to deny not only the victims of climate change, but our shared humanity. Thank you.
To reduce global warming, we can introduce carbon capture technologies which will capture the carbon and suppress them into the ground, or they can be used later on. The global and eventually reducing global warming. We should provide these refugees with free shelter as they have been forced out from their homes through a natural disaster. The amount of carbon emissions by a country should be covered by either helping the climate refugees or by paying heavy taxes. In short, the issue of climate refugees is not an individual challenge, rather it's a global challenge. But in order to have an effect, the ideas I presented before need to be implemented so everyone has the opportunity to live safely and with dignity. Thank you.
Countries which are trying to get affected, their people should be brought to other countries. Most of the countries which are causing high carbon emissions should provide the refugees the area. This will help the refugees get better and well-paying jobs. There should be laws to tax the countries with high carbon emissions, and the refugees should be given financial aid to help them settle in the area. Flood barriers should be built to stop floods and other extreme weather disasters, and people should be educated about climate change, and the root cause, which is global warming, should be solved.
In conclusion, the issue of climate refugees is a global challenge that requires a global solution. Countries have a moral and practical obligation to assist. International cooperation is essential for effective management. A distinct legal status is necessary to protect rights, and targeted support can help communities adapt to and mitigate the impacts of climate change. As young thinkers and future leaders, it is up to us to raise our voices for those who have been silenced by the forces of climate change. Together, we can advocate for a world where no one is left behind and everyone has the opportunity to live safely and with dignity. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we reach the conclusion of this debate, it is crucial to remember that the issue of climate refugee is not just a distinct concern. It is an urgent reality that demands our collective action. The lives of millions hang in the balance, and our response will define not only our compassion, but our legacy as a global community. We have argued that countries have a moral and legal obligation to protect climate refugees, who are fleeing not by choice, but by necessity. International cooperation is not just an option, it is a necessity if we are to effectively address this crisis. We must also push for the legal recognition of climate refugees to ensure they receive the protection they deserve. Countries should participate in international agreements. Existing frameworks do not specifically tell about climate refugees or give them any recognition, but touch the root cause of their displacement. We should develop policies that address climate migration and displacement. Technology should be used to identify vulnerable areas, mobile alert system, and training purposes. This is not merely a question of policy, it is test of our humanity. Will we turn our backs on those in need, or will we rise to the occasion and embrace our shared responsibility? The strength of our argument lies in the foundation on justice, compassion, and practicality. Let us leave here today, not just as debater, panelists, audiences. Thank you.
Congratulations to everyone who participated. You may be seated. The results for both the debate and the panel discussion will be announced shortly. Okay, so we have finally reached our decisions. All the judges have conferred at length, and believe me, it was not easy. The participants have put in a lot of hard work, and we have decided who will. There are three categories. The first prize, the runner-up, and an honorable mention for both the debating and the declamation contest. Regarding the declamation, I would just like you to ponder about these things because it was not covered in much detail. The option of staying in your country or moving to another country, agreed that the developed countries have a lot of responsibility, but maybe we could have another debate sometime later on what resettlement issues are and what the climate refugees face when they go to another country. Okay, so starting with the debate, I would also like to thank our judges, Dr. Nayyar, Amar Mehdi, and Shariar Khan for their time and effort in helping us decide. And these have been reached by consensus, the names. So for the debate, the first prize goes to Haitham Tahir. Please come on stage. So, anything you would like to say? How was this experience for you?
I've been doing a lot of MUNs, but this was my first time doing a debate, so it was very fruitful. There were very good debate arguments from both sides, and I feel like I'm much better known about this topic now.
Okay, the runner-up prize goes to Ahmad Abdul Moiz. He's not here. And the honorable mention goes to Hissan Haider Malik. He's also not here. Okay, so let me also mention the criteria along which we have awarded these prizes. The prizes have been awarded for clarity of argument, originality of argument, and not necessarily about being forceful or aggressive in your arguments. Okay? So as opposed to the Model United Nation, which seems to be the rage nowadays in schools, we at the Black Hole do not want to promote that mode of argument in which you necessarily need to shoot down your debater. ठीक है, तो हमारा आइडिया ये है कि आपको इस तरह हम डिबेटिंग कराएं या सिखाएं that you learn to respect other opinions and work along with them rather than aggressively promoting your own or your own argument. What right or wrong is another issue, लेकिन एक डिबेट का, एक civilized डिबेट का जो तरीका होता है उसको हम यहाँ पर foster करना चाहते हैं.
3, 2, 1. अच्छा चल थोड़ा सस्पेंस भी क्रिएट करते हैं. So for the declamation contest, the honorable mention. Okay. You can give the correct one later. So for the declamation contest, the honorable mention goes to Yashfa Maheen. What would you like to say? Okay. ठीक है. The runner-up prize goes to Aman Sheikh, Mohammad Aman Sheikh. Aman, would you like to say something?
I'm honored to discuss with you guys. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you to you.
Okay, and for the declamation contest, the first prize goes to Noor Fatma. Very good, Noor. What would you like to say?
I would like to thank the Black Hole for providing me a platform where I could show my abilities. I have learned a lot. Believe me, I have learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And of course, all our participants will get a certificate of participation. So we'll distribute them now.
Abir Ahmed. Abir Ahmed.
Abir, you came very close to getting a prize, but next time do not read. Okay, that's where you lost marks.
Haitham Tahir. Abdurrahman Talha.
You also came very close, but fluency issues. Need to practice that. Your arguments were very good.
Muhammad Aman Sheikh. Rayan Khan Jadoon. Iman Sayed. Hassan Haidar Malik. Muhammad Ibrahim. Binni Shahid. Shahir Ahmed. Shahir Ahmed. Noor Fatma. Talha. Rayan Ghazanfar. Mohammad Shehram Jalil. Shehram Jalil. Mohammad Shayan Ilyas. Mohammad Anas Halim. Saddam Talha.
So we conclude this debating session. I thank you all for your participation. And our next session will be in the spring term next year. So please be on the lookout for that. Good luck and goodbye.